Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2013. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Craig is in our control room managing the Truth Warp Drive, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. In our third hour today, Keith Johnson from Activist Post is going to be joining us talking about gun control, gun rights. We appear to be on the verge of another push to find a reason or an excuse to disarm all of Americans so they can come take your gold and your silver and your pets or whatever else it is they want to take from you to try and prop up this failing system here a little bit. As you're probably already aware, I was on Coast to Coast late last night, so I was up late, but I doubled up on the coffee this morning, so I'm all caffeinated and ready to go, and we're going to have a good show today here. Now, starting off here with Obamacare, this is really turning into something that I think is probably going to wind up in the history books as a classic example of epic fail on the part of the government and epic fail by the political parties to try and assign blame to each other. And Obamacare is turning out to be the emperor's new clothes because obviously Obama is out there trying to put a positive face on this thing, saying the idea is good even if the implementation is a little glitchy. Carney and Sebelius, they're just trying to keep going that this is a workable, working concept and just bear with us while they get the problems out. And it really isn't. From the point of view of public perception, the success or failure of a program is an all-or-nothing deal. It either works or it does not, and right now it does not. And we have people who are losing their current insurance because it's not Obamacare compliant, and they're not able to go in and sign up for the new Obamacare compliant policies through the web interface. They're being encouraged to call the 800 toll-free number, which we already know what that actually spells out. And that toll-free number, when you're finished pressing all the press 5 for instructions in Swahili, directs you back to the website. So this thing is really become an absolute joke. Now, the Republicans are back to saying this needs to be delayed. And they are absolutely correct to do so. Now, I've noticed in the corporate media, especially on Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, they're trying to say, oh, the Republicans were bad. They were trying to halt it. And yes, there's part about the Republicans are bad. No, the perception of the public, I think, is going to be that regardless of the reasons why the Republicans were trying to delay Obamacare, they were doing the right thing. It simply was not ready. And I think the Democrats realize that what was going to be their flagship campaign issue going into next year's midterm elections has now become an anchor around their necks. They're hoisting with their own petard. They're raising on a busted flush. And the more and more they push this thing, the more and more the American people are going to say, this is not working. It is a bad policy and a bad system being forced on us. And I think the American people are going to basically go back the other way and say, whatever Ted Cruz had on his mind, he was doing the right thing. Now, yesterday we were talking about the fact that somebody had brought up this idea that just because people are trying to enroll in Obamacare and they're not able to, the IRS should back off starting to impose those insane fines on people for refusing to buy if the government tells you to buy. And as you know, the official deadline is January 1st of next year, which is a little over 2 months. And the IRS is already drooling. They're getting out there. Yes, we're going to start fining them. And it's one of those classic catch-22s. Americans want to sign up but can't. And because they can't, the IRS is going to come after them, imposing these heavy fines. Well, now Jay Carney is sort of hemming and hawing that, well, if the website isn't working by March 31st, they may back off this fine thing. Gee, you think? I mean, how do you think the American people are going to view a system in which you are told to do X and X doesn't work, and because X doesn't work, you're going to be asked to pay for it? As I keep telling you, this is a cash grab. That's all Obamacare is. It's a cash grab. This government doesn't care about your health. Or they'd be doing something about the 400,000 Americans that die every year from medical mistakes. They'd be doing something about toxic food additives, toxic vaccine adjuvants. They would allow GMO labeling, if not have an outright ban. They don't care about your health. Their attention is focused solely on your wallet, their little tunnel vision going down to your wallet and how much might still be in it that they need to keep this little Ponzi scheme economic model going. So Obama's supporters are still out there trying to basically put a positive spin on this, to turn this sow's ear into some kind of a silk purse. They're still out there saying, well, the glitches are all because this is so insanely popular. That's the reason it glitched. And again, if you go to Google, which has a traffic volume orders of magnitude above healthcare.gov, it works just fine. When you type in your search request, you don't get a message saying, we'll come back to you with your search results next February. And on the back end, the health insurance companies are going public saying the data they are getting from the system is absolute total garbage. It's completely unreliable, and they can't calculate anything realistically from their actuarial tables because what they're getting from the healthcare exchange is complete junk. Now, as we reported yesterday, there is a case making its way through the federal court system, and it's based on the fact that the Obamacare legislation allowed states to opt out of the national system if they agreed to set up their own exchanges, and many states did. And if the states opted out and set up their own exchanges, then Obamacare was not supposed to come into those states. They weren't supposed to come in and tinker. And yet the Obamacare did. And that's a violation of the actual letter of that law. So there's a lawsuit moving forward that could result in a court injunction against Obamacare, could tie it up in the courts for months. So they are clearly, at this point, not going to get that sudden influx of new tax revenues from the insane profits being made by the health insurance companies. And that's why they're back on global warming and carbon tax, and they're trying to come up with some other way to take more money away from you. And where does that money go? Well, we know that while they talk about cutting benefits to the American people, support for those people who've just been absolutely slammed by the financial shenanigans in Wall Street, that military spending is still a huge, huge problem. Now, apparently a report by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction is confirming something that we heard before. By the time it goes through all the military contractors, a gallon of gasoline delivered to the war front in Afghanistan is $500 per gallon. They're in the middle of oil countries. And somehow, the military contractors are charging $500 per gallon of gasoline delivered in Afghanistan. Our guys could just go down to the local gas station right there in Afghanistan and tank up their tanks for much less than that. It's a money-making venture. It's just all about looting you to make the cronies rich. You want to balance the budget? If you called off all these wars right now, the federal government could cut all tax rates in half and not reduce any other services. And the U.S. economy would light up like a Christmas tree or a Hanukkah bush, depending upon which direction you're coming from. But they won't do it. We're in a wartime economy. To force the world to continue to use the U.S. dollar for all commerce, reserve banking, global trade. And it's not working because the world is abandoning the dollar faster than the U.S. can conquer them. So there's really only one way this is ultimately going to end. Paul Craig Roberts had a few comments about that. We'll talk about it when we return from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And over at RINF.com, there's an article written by Paul Craig Roberts, who we've had on the show before, basically saying that he sees next year, 2014, as the year where it's all going to come crashing down. And I know everybody's out here prognosticating when will it end, when will it end. Personally, I'm surprised they've held it together this long. But it is just a matter of when. It's not if, it's when it's going to come down. And to summarize Paul Craig Roberts' analysis, and it's hardly unique to him, the U.S. is losing economic and political power, and it's reached the stage where it is irreversible, because we know in the end the U.S. will try and regain economic and political control of the world through a global war that they are not going to win, ultimately. That's the real danger. The people inside Washington, D.C., they're surrounded by all these staffers who are saying, oh, yes, Mr. Politician, you're absolutely correct. We can do this. America is still mighty. We're still the greatest nation on earth. The world will bow down before our nuclear weapons. And it will go nuclear because this country, the United States of America, is militarily exhausted. All the stockpiles are drawn down from 12 years of war in Afghanistan, with no end in sight. The weapon systems produced at extraordinarily high cost are proving to be unreliable and ineffective. This nation cannot prevail in a ground war of any long duration or scope, because this is not the same nation that was on the winning side in big mistake number 1 or big mistake number 2. We've lost the 3 M's. We don't have the manufacturing, we don't have the money, and we don't have the manpower to win a new world war in the conventional sense. And that means it is inevitable. When we take that final step over that irrevocable line, the U.S. will resort to its nuclear arsenal. And that's going to be a bad day for everybody on both sides. Because one of the articles of faith that the United States has is they've got this ballistic missile defense system that they have put something like, I don't actually know the number. It's a huge, vast amount of money, going all the way back to Reagan's Star Wars initiative. And most of that money was spent without getting anything that works. And they've spent billions and billions of dollars on these systems to track incoming ballistic warheads, following a nice, smooth, curving arc, in order to intercept them. And the Russians spent far, far less money developing warheads that can maneuver, that can dipsy-doodle, that can corkscrew, which makes a ballistic prediction of where they're going absolutely impossible. So this entire ballistic missile defense system the U.S. has spent all this money on is already obsolete today. But it's no problem. All those people in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, they've got their bunkers. They've been building them for a decade now, all these giant underground bunkers with giant plasma screen TVs and stockpiles of food. You think the preppers you see on TV are going overboard? You should see what the government is doing. They've reactivated the Greenbrier. There's Mount Weather. They built a huge facility underneath the northeast end of Griffith Park when we were still living there. Another one supposedly under the new Denver airport. Got a big one up here in the middle of the H3 as it goes through the Ko'olau Mountains. They've got their bunkers built. You paid for it. You won't be allowed inside, of course. They'll go inside and say, all right, we screwed up, triggered a nuclear war, but hey, look at the bright side. When we come on out, going to be hardly anybody around. It'll be a beautiful paradise, a Garden of Eden, and we'll have it all to ourselves. Anyway, another little story coming out about Wall Street's corruption, or at least an unfair advantage. This is over at therebel.org, where Wall Street banks are getting stock market data 10 minutes before anyone else. Now, if you watch corporate media with their stock ticker, if you have the little stock readout on your smartphone, that data is anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes old by the time you get it. And the reason is so that you can't just sit there riding the stocks and say buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell, and churn the market. But the Wall Street banks, they're getting that data instantaneously. They've got direct hookups between their computers and the computers at the stock market. They have to have that information in a timely fashion. They're dependent on it. It's an unfair advantage to have that information. In the space of 10 minutes, you can do all kinds of manipulations of stock. Story coming out of silverdoctors.com. The U.S. labor force participation rate is at a 35-year low. 101 million working-age Americans without a job. That's a 30% jobless rate that is way beyond the worst of the Depression of the 1930s. So this is the new Great Depression, or we'll call it the Grand Depression. It sounds positive. We'll use a word that makes it sound like it's a good thing. It's the Grand Depression, the Glorious Depression. It's like the way they use the word growth to talk about the economy like it's a positive thing, and it isn't. Because when they talk about the growth of the economy under private central banking, issuing the public currencies of load and interest, what they're talking about is a growth in the aggregate indebtedness of the people. The more the economy grows, the more the people are enslaved to debt to those private bankers. And it's important to remember that when they talk about economic growth, they're not talking about productivity. They're not talking about earnings. They're simply talking about increase in debt. And so that growth number can be a little bit misleading because the economy can be growing leaps and bounds. If people are having to borrow money and they don't have the means to pay it back, the economy is going to grow like incredible. But it doesn't mean the economy is working as a system. We're going to take a phone call here. Kyle in Philadelphia. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Well, first of all, what you're saying about the economy is absolutely right. And the biggest problem we face in the economy is that we don't have a stable economy. Our economy is based, if it's not growing, then it's shrinking, and it depends on constant growth, and that's not something that's a rational belief. There needs to be a certain level of stability and maintaining.
You are absolutely right here. It is an inherently, automatically unstable system, and that is why government regulation of the economy is absolutely essential to prevent a disaster. But this government has completely abandoned regulation. They're over there with the money junkies enriching themselves here. When this country was set up, and Kyle, I'm going to keep you into the next segment, so don't get upset if I talk into the commercial break on this. When this country was first set up, when there was no private central bank that was given the authority to create money, banks relied on deposits to conduct their business. And when the economy started to slow down, when productivity slowed down, people would put less money into the bank. They would borrow less money from the bank. It was a naturally stable system, unless it was being tinkered with and manipulated, which did happen. But with our current system, because it always creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, they always have to find more borrowers to keep that pyramid going, and that is a naturally destabilizing effect. And that is why if you're going to be enslaved to that kind of a private central bank, somebody's got to keep control on it to keep it from going out of control, and that is supposed to be the federal government and the federal regulators. But when they abandon that role, when they just side on over to Wall Street and say, let's all get rich together at the expense of the American people, that's fascism. And if you look at the history of any fascist economic state, they rapidly go out of control, they go into hyperinflation, and they collapse, and that's what's happening here.
Well, it's been said that our economy is the engine of our country, except the problem we deal with is our engine is a 19th century coal-burning engine that constantly needs to be fed over and over and over again, and that's no way.
That's a good analogy. Kyle, that's a good analogy. Don't hang up. I'm coming back to you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, welcome back to the show. We're talking with Kyle in Philadelphia, and Kyle, your analogy about the economy being an engine is bang spot on. I would argue, though, that the heart of any economy is the labor of the people, producing goods, services, growing crops, because labor precedes real wealth, and that is the feedstock for any economy. You can't have an economy that is solely consisting of printing up pieces of ink and paper. That is merely the device for the money junkies to take control and hijack the labor of the people to their own purposes. Now, before I let you get back on the microphone, an analogy I like to use regarding an engine being an economy is that when you have an engine, like let's say you got a big pickup truck, and you're driving that truck up a hill, the engine is the economy. Now, part of that engine's energy is used up keeping the engine running itself, overcoming friction, running the water pump, oil pump, energy loss through the transmission. And as you load more load into the truck, those are taxes. And the more you load in there, the more energy carrying the load takes. And if you hitch a trailer onto the back of the truck and you load more rocks onto that, you will reach a point where so much energy is being drained out of the system there isn't enough energy for the engine to run itself, and the engine will stutter and stall, and it will happen all at once. It's not a gradual slowdown. You'll be grind, boom, stop. And that's what's happening right now, and you will not get that engine going until you reduce that load. And that is why these cash grabs that we are seeing by the government trying to keep the economy going are, in the long run, quite counterproductive. The way to get this economy going again for the long term is to reduce taxation and cost to the people whose labor precedes all capital. And it basically underscores the fact that Wall Street is only thinking about their next quarterly stockholders report. Washington, D.C. is thinking only about the next payment they have to make to the bankers, and nobody's really thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the road what's best for the nation. Kyle, please step in here and complete the thought you were on.
Well, and I think everything you said is absolutely correct and spot on, and it's a great analogy, but it's not our country. Sadly, right now, our country's economy is based on whether the driver of the car believes he can get up the mountain or not. It's all based on the confidence that the driver has in himself. This is one area that you and I do differ in, because I absolutely agree. Eventually, the fuel's going to run out. Eventually, the engine's going to stop working. But I don't think that the people who are driving this economy and driving this car are simply going to turn it off, unlock the door, and walk out. I believe they're going to blow the car up. I believe they're going to say, you know what, we messed up, but we're not taking the blame for it. Bang, blow it all up. They're not going to simply let it die and be worked on and rebuilt again.
Well, you're absolutely correct there, and obviously the belief of the driver that he can get up the hill is completely irrelevant to whether or not the load and the engine of the truck and gravity are working against him. And that is a big part of the problem, because Wall Street has blinders on. They want to believe that this Ponzi scheme central bank can be made to work forever. Washington, D.C. Wants to believe they can find a way out of this mess. They haven't found it yet, but they're just going to hold it together, and a miracle will happen somewhere down the road. And they are trapped by that belief system and refuse to really look at what is obvious to pretty much everybody else in the world here. Thank you very much for the phone call, Kyle. We're going to switch over to John in Montana. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing just great. What's on your mind today?
Well, I listened to you last night on Coast to Coast. That was a pretty interesting program. I like to listen to George at night. But anyway, you know, I'm just thinking how discombobulated everything is. And, you know, we're headed for the worst, but prepare for the best, I guess, or however you want to put it. I just thought I'd call and compliment you on your show last night. It was very interesting.
Well, thank you very much for that. And to get back what you were talking about, we'd all like to hope for the best, but we need to prepare for the worst. And most importantly, and we saw this during the shutdown, people who are in positions of dependence on the government need to understand that government has become very undependable, and they need to take that into their planning. And now is really a good time for communities to start organizing their own support infrastructure for those who are food challenged or in need of some kind of aid, because the government gains power over us with this model of give us all your money and we will take care of you. And obviously they're taking all the money and they're taking care of themselves. And when it hits a hiccup, the first people to get cut off from support are those who gave the money in the first place. And along with just doing the normal prepping stuff in your own home, you should be going out, networking with your local neighborhood and community and saying, okay, you know, we have to start really thinking about how would we take care of ourselves if this government that forces us to be dependent on them should all of a sudden cut us off, because we will be the first to be cut off when things start to go really, really bad, okay?
You know, I've been a feeder most of my life. I've been a certified chef since the 90s. We've done the chef and the child. I've organized donations and stuff. Like, I really respect you for what you and your wife do in Hawaii there. But, you know, I've catered firefighters to daycare centers, to soup kitchens, to, you know, and ill-prepared. And it comes down to food and water. I don't care. You can throw your gold and silver out in the middle of the street. You can't eat it. And you can't make a stock out of it or a gravy. And You know, the biggest thing is making sure that your kids are fed. They don't go to bed hungry. They don't go to school hungry. You know, there's so ill-informed people out there that you try and, you know, but sometimes they're afraid when you put your hand up and say, hey, you know, it's time to get prepared, and then all of a sudden you're an outcast because you're either a prepper or a lunatic.
Well, what it is when you're out there saying, I am prepared to deal with a potential problem, is you're forcing other people to confront their own doubts. And a lot of Americans are still, they want to believe the government will always be there to take care of them. They want to believe that life is going to go on exactly as it is. And, you know, there was a joke running around, you know, how do you tell a prepper? They were the ones not going through the garbage bins for food following Hurricane Sandy. And it really is common sense, but there's still a lot of denial out there, people who just want to believe our government is good, the rest of the world is evil. My mother-in-law is a good example of that. They don't want to deal with the possibility that their own lives could be disrupted by what's going on. I think this is one of the reasons we see so many people trying to view food-challenged Americans or homeless or jobless Americans as somehow deserving of that, because it's a way of avoiding their own fear that something could happen to them and put them on the streets, take their home away, make them hungry. And so it's another form of self-denial. But this is no time for Americans to be hiding under the blankets and saying it's not going to touch me, it's not going to touch me. Ultimately, it's going to touch every single American.
They don't know how fast that Walmart can empty out, Costco can empty out. I've had visions of pickups going right through the front window with people with shotguns in the back of them going right to the meat department because they have families to feed.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there is only 3 days' supply of food in the delivery chain at any one time. What's that old saying from Spain? Between civilization and anarchy is only 7 days. And after 15 days without food, people are ready to start eating each other. So. Well,
you know, Glenn Beck talked about cannibalism a year or 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, I
had an opportunity to go to New York to film a pilot about cooking in Alaska, and I've been to L.A. and that, and them inner cities where they just got the corner market, once they're out of food in the inner city, it is anarchy.
Yeah, and the cities are going to get hit hardest because they don't have an alternative. Whereas people in the rural area, and they're out there already planting seeds. There's what we're calling guerrilla gardening going on, where people are taking vegetable seeds and just throwing them everywhere on public lands just so that there's going to be something growing that they can go out and harvest. They're learning how to live off the land. The people in the rural areas are going to do a lot better than the people in the inner cities.
Oh, of course. Well, where I'm at in Montana, we're feeding the deer apples now to make sure that we've got a herd.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I used to do the same thing when we lived in Washington State. I didn't have to take a deer there. The last time I took a deer was actually in Southern California, and I did use it all. I did use it all. All right, we got to let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break here. All right.
Aloha.
Aloha. Thanks an awful lot. When we come back, we're going to go back to the economy here, and we're going to be talking about quantitative easing. It is obvious the U.S. is now stuck in it, and more experts are saying it was never a good idea in the long run to begin with. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, a while back, some months back, we reported on the revelation that the spreadsheet model that was set up to evaluate austerity had a flaw in it. Maybe it was done by the same people who did the Obamacare website. But the government went ahead with it anyway, and even with the revelation of the error, is continuing these policies, which are causing all kinds of problems in Europe. In fact, we're starting to get word that Europe is not going to be able to avoid a default next month, which is going to trigger that whole credit default swap firestorm that everybody's waiting for. Now, over in Japan, their architect of their quantitative easing policy is saying what we all know. Quantitative easing harms the economy in the long run because it adds to inflation, and it basically incentivizes failed policy in the financial sector. And he's saying what I've been saying for months now. The Federal Reserve is now stuck in a quantitative easing trap. They can't stop. Wall Street and Washington, D.C. are now on life support. They're dependent on that little IV line going right into the arm, pumping in $40 billion in newly created money every single month to keep things going. If they pull out that IV line, Wall Street will collapse. Washington, D.C. will collapse. We were all told this was temporary. We're just going to have to do it once and everything will be better. Then there was quantitative easing 2 and quantitative easing 3 and quantitative easing infinity. And now it's a permanent policy. We're heading into Zimbabwe territory. We're going to grab some phone calls here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha. Scott, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing there, Mike? You know, Mike, it is amazing. I want to give kudos to that last caller about that situation with the food and the food and it's more important water than gold and silver. Mike, I was talking to my friend the other day that I've been with. He woke up to this situation about these people that you talk to, and he goes into work and talks to these people, and they think he's a nut and crazy. And, you know, Mike, these are the people that are really going to go through a hard time down the road because they sit there and say, oh, guys, you're crazy, you're a fake. Well, Mike, the verdict is this. What can you say that after 9/11, folks? Can you say that things can't happen after 9/11? These people
and worse that the government and the worst that the government won't do it to you to get some kind of an agenda or to trick you out of your money and obedience, whether it's 9/11 or global warming. Or Assad's gassing his own weapon. What's going on for a lot of Americans is the government is assuming the psychological position of a parent. They want all Americans to be like children, dependent on government to hand out the food and the security. And if you've ever seen a child or even a spouse in an abusive relationship, they cannot see the person that they're dependent on in a bad light, because it calls into question their own future security. And so you will see abusive children grow up thinking that they must have done something wrong or bad to deserve that treatment. An abused wife thinks, it's got to be something with me. It can't possibly be my husband who's bad because, I'm dependent on him for food and so forth. And we're seeing that same sort of abused spouse, abused child syndrome in a lot of the American people. They don't want to have to confront the fact that this government has gone horribly wrong if they are in a position of dependence on them. And the government encourages this. That's why even as they're cutting food stamp money, they're still advertising for people, come on down, sign up for food stamps. They want to create a situation in which everybody is dependent on the government for their next meal so that we will stay silent and not question what they're doing.
Well, Mike, the bottom line is that I challenged everybody. Mike, I mentioned this in the past, and I'm so thankful, Mike. I've been talking to you for so many years, and sometimes we have our disagreement, but brother, you have totally woke up to this situation of this Ponzi scheme and all this. And Mike, I wanted to go back to saying that you're a true brother. And you stand up with the truth. But the problem is, Mike, these people are in monetary bias. And you wonder how they are after 9/11. I mean, I was watching this YouTube a while back, Mike, about this retired sergeant. And you know what he said, Mike? And I'll end with this. He said, if you guys are not woke up now by 9/11, I don't feel sorry for you. You know what, Mike? Those are true words. Take care, brother, and get some sleep tonight off that big night you had. I didn't get a chance to listen to you, but I bet you let some fireballs off. Take care. I love you. God bless.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And actually, today's a busy day, too, because after my own show, I've got 2 other interviews on 2 other radio shows that I'm going to have to get to. So the coffee is perking, and we're keeping myself caffeinated. And again, going back to 9/11, we need to understand, throughout all of American history, the government creates these crises to manipulate us. And that is another reason why people should not want to be dependent on a government that rules them through lies, fraud, and deception. Back to the phones. John in Barbados. Aloha. John, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, I'm Michael. Earlier today I was reading a devastating critique of the American political scene, Congress, Senate, presidency, the administration as a whole, and its fiscal and financial policies and economic policies by a very well-known character, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, the advisor to Ronald Reagan in that capacity. And the way I see it is that with so many unemployed and underemployed people requiring benefits of various kinds, and probably 35 to 40% of those who are actually employed are sucking off the system because they're working for the government. What chance does the American economy have to recover when there are so few people in actual productive industries?
Well, we had that article by Paul Craig Roberts linked to whatreallyhappened.com, and I remember a few years back, before things really got bad, there was this running joke about an American company and a Japanese company getting into a rowing race. And the Japanese company sent 9 rowers and a coxswain for their boat, and the American company sent a coxswain, a vice coxswain, an inspector of safety, and so forth down, and only 1 rower. And, of course, they lost the race. So the American company held a management review to review what was going on and why they were being beaten so badly by the Japanese, and their conclusion was that the 1 rower had to row harder. And it actually is very true. American companies are hugely management-heavy, because everybody wants to wear the suit and tie, and they want to be in the front office, and they want to flirt with the secretaries. And we have so reduced people who actually make and grow things to the lowest level of our social order that we're literally killing that goose that lays our golden eggs here. Again, a lot of this goes back to Harvard Business School and the MBA that created a corporate culture with no love and respect for the process of actually making whatever it is you're selling. And that has really poisoned our entire corporate structure in terms of creating an economy that's productive versus a giant open-air casino.
Yeah, it seems to me, Michael, that there is this idea of austerity and taking money out of the pockets of the Americans, not just those on benefits, but those in work, and the increasing costs placed upon them for their health care. All it's doing is actually reducing the discretionary income that people have to spend in goods and services of others. And that is just a spiral downwards in the economy.
Discretionary money is going away. In addition to the high taxes, the government is now telling us what we must buy with what little bit they leave us. And it's another form of taxation. It's covert, but it's another form of taxation because the government spends your money for you. We got to take a break for Phyllis Shapley and commercials. Thank you, John. We've got 2 more callers waiting. I'm going to ask you to wait for a few minutes. We'll get to you as soon as we come back from this break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. We're going to go back to the phones here. Wes in Idaho. Aloha, Wes. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Wes, are you there? All right. Can we go over to Ralph in California then? Ralph, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. It's Ralph again. And listened to your show yesterday, coast to coast. Good job. And guess you're moving on up, or, I don't know, moving on up. Just, your show's...
I prefer to think of it as becoming notorious.
Being known. Because, your show's excellent. So it's like... George Norrie, he's there. It's more cream puffs. And when you're on there, it just amplifies it much better.
Well, thank you very much. They've indicated to me that they're going to make this a regular thing.
Yeah, I think it's great. They need that, and it's awesome. Hey, I'm calling in regarding preparation and stuff, and I'm starting to build up, doing stuff. And one of the things is just having clean water. And there's 2 things I'm doing. Well, one thing I bought is those 2 things. It's going to give us clean water now and be able to provide me for the future. Is, those atmospheric generators, atmospheric water generators?
Yeah, I know. They work by condensation.
Yeah, well, I didn't buy that. I said, you know what? It's a dehumidifier. And I go, well, okay. And I told my buddy that's what I'm going to do. And he said, well, get a construction grade. Well,
the problem is they do take a lot of energy to run. And an atmospheric water generator makes sense if you also have a really powerful electrical generator and a lot of fuel to run it.
Exactly. Well, I plan to build up on my solar panel kit just to go ahead and handle that.
Okay.
What I got was it's either a 50 pint, I'm going to find that out, or 90 pints, so either 6 gallons or 11 gallons. So my main thing, no matter what, is to have clean water. And then I'll just filtrate it, do a filter system with a Berkeley water filtration system.
Those are good.
But because I want clean water. That's it. There's no fluoride, no anything else. So, and another key thing is you build up your survival kit is duct tape.
Yeah.
Pretty handy to have.
Yeah, the military grade duct tape. A lot of the stuff they sell at the hardware stores just doesn't live up to the reputation because it's all value engineered, But another source for that, for the really good stuff, filmmakers call it gaffer's tape. And that is really much closer to the original cloth and gummy duct tape that was all originally missile tape, believe it or not. It was actually developed to strap down the wires on the outside of Atlas missiles because they didn't have tubes going through those fuel tanks. They just ran the wires down the outside, taped them down, and that was how they made that happen.
Interesting. Well, I just wanted to bring that up. So people can just buy a $200 dehumidifier if they want to do that, and that's not a whole lot of power consumption versus the one I was able to get lucky. It's $1,100 unit for $100 on Craigslist. So I got lucky.
Well, listen, I don't know how much land you're sitting on, but you might also want to look into just the idea of a solar still, because those can be built.
I want to do that too.
Yeah, those can generate a lot of clean water without, just working from sunlight, assuming you live in an area where you've got ground to put out solar stills and there's a lot of moisture inherent in the ground.
I'm in the city.
Then that lets that idea out of that completely. All right. Well,
anyways, I just wanted to bring that up.
All right. Well, Wes, thank you very much for that. We're going to switch over. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You're Ralph, and I guess Wes in Idaho never came back, so the phone lines are open. And let's get back down to the economic news. It appears that down under in Australia, the Australian government has now fallen into the bailout trap. Australia's new Conservative government just gave their central bank a multi-billion-dollar cash injection, saying it is necessary to protect the nation from potential global economic shocks. Well, the best way to protect your nation from potential global economic shocks is to start unplugging from that global banking network, because that is where the risk is. And one of the reasons I have argued against globalization, whether it's of the economy or of nations, is those national borders serve the same function that fireproof doors do in a building or watertight bulkheads do in a ship. They contain a problem. Now, if you're in a building and you block open those fireproof doors, yes, people can move around more quickly and it seems like things are better and more efficient, but when you get the first fire, the whole structure goes down. Same thing with a ship. If you block open those watertight doors, your first leak is your last leak. And the same thing is true of the global economy. And so if you want to protect your nation from the coming global economic meltdown, you need to start putting those fireproof doors and watertight doors back into place and slam them shut. As far as Australia giving their central bank a cash injection, I bet you can't inject just once. It's going to be the same thing down there that we are seeing here in the United States. It will become necessary, inevitable, and they won't be able to stop. They'll become addicted to it. All right, we're going to grab another phone call here. Wes in Idaho. Aloha, Wes. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's take Jim in Georgia first. Jim, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Okay, I read in the paper, China sent dog jerky here, and 600 dogs died from the jerky, and there's thousands that were sick. And what tickled me is China now wants to take chicken from the United States, take it over there, process it, cook it, and send it back to the United States. Now, what do you think about that?
Well, I think we need to be looking very, very carefully at just who it was who made the decision to buy that particular product and bring it into the United States of America. And I'm seeing a lot of gratuitous China bashing, and the reality is China is going to make and sell what the people doing the buying want to buy. Now, China makes some very good products, like the Apple products are manufactured in China, so we know they can do a quality product. But if you have American importers who are saying, give me the cheapest thing you can make, China's going to say, well, if that's what you want, that's what we'll give you. And so the issue for me isn't so much, it's not like China forced America to use melanin or this jerky or other cheap products. Some American importer said, this will maximize our profits and we don't really care what's in it. So I think we need to really look at what's going on. China's going to sell whatever anybody wants to buy, and let the buyer beware. And if you have American buyers who are buying these products to then resell to the American public, I think the blame falls on them rather than on China. Now, I don't know what was in this jerky that is killing the dogs. Was it a product intended for dogs, or was it intended for human consumption? Because
it was intended for dogs, and
it was a dog.
Killed in the United States, and thousands of them sick. And they just said in the United States 600 died. They didn't say what other countries died. The animals died of that product, you know. But it just scares me to buy a product from China that is not regulated.
Well, I think the regulation, the United States can't regulate China. What the United States should be doing is regulating our own borders to say unsafe products are not allowed in. That's the way this is supposed to be done. But just like our border with Mexico is wide open for illegal immigrants, our national borders are wide open for unsafe, dangerous products. That's where the enforcement needs to be happening, and our government has dropped the ball on it, and they want to just say, oh, it's China's doing the evil China. Don't blame us. Where's the USDA? Where's the FDA? Where are all these heavily taxpayer-funded agencies that are supposed to be keeping a watch on the safety and efficacy of products in our stores? That's who dropped the ball.
Right. I agree, Michael, but I'm just very suspicious about buying a product from China now. So,
well, like I said, China does make good products, like the iPhone and the iPad. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with Wes in Idaho after these few words. Bye-bye. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're finally going to get to Wes in Idaho. Aloha. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Hello. Are we on?
We're on the air. What is on your mind?
Okay. As a long-time RBN listener and supporter, I object to be calling a kook and...
okay, thank you very much. Okay. I was kind of expecting that after last night, coast to coast, all kinds of... the vast majority of email I got from that was obviously positive. Actually connected with some people I hadn't known in Hollywood for years who said, oh, you're cool again. Anyway, getting back to other stories. Speaking of Australia, we were talking about Australia injecting money into their central bank down there. The Australian government is now finally acknowledging that the massive wildfires that are still going on around Sydney were started by military explosives training. Oh, let's go out and learn how to blow things up. And apparently they weren't very careful with the ground cover or the wind, and the wind just blew the sparks, and it's a huge, huge disaster out there. So apparently the biggest military threat to Australia right now is their own military. Alrighty, now then, over in the European Union, we're seeing an article out of wakeupfromyourslumber.com, again reinforcing that more and more top economists are saying austerity does not work and will not work. And again, we reported earlier this year that the spreadsheet model that was used to sell the idea that austerity was going to work to save countries from economic problems had a major flaw. Some of the equations were wrong. Whole areas of data were not even referenced. They weren't even included. And the spreadsheet was flawed. Nobody double-checked it. Just like Obamacare software system, they said, okay, we've got it. This says that we're right to do what we're doing, and they went ahead and did that. And it's a complete disaster here. Now, over in Switzerland, there's kind of an interesting situation. They have been dealing with growing wealth inequality over there. And they are looking at a proposal before the Swiss people right now that the government will guarantee a minimum income for every Swiss citizen of approximately $2,750 a month in order to keep the money flowing at all levels of their economy. And this is a very smart thing to do. And had our government done that back in 2008, we would not be in the mess we're in right now. They moved the money in the wrong direction. They took trillions of dollars away from the American people to give to the banks to loan back to the American people at interest. Wonderful deal for the bankers. Actually, they put most of that money in their pocket in these outrageous bonuses. But for an economy to function as a system, money must be flowing at all levels of society and into all necessary sectors of investment. And right now, the United States economy is all geared around financial manipulation and Wall Street, and they're piling the money up over the 1%. And they've starved the rest of the nation for enough currency to conduct commerce, unless you want to borrow it at interest, so the banks get a piece of the action. And necessary and important sectors for investment in this country are being neglected. And I have an article I wrote called The Fatal Flaws in Wall Street's Theories, which I will reprise to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com on the next commercial break. Meanwhile, we're going to take a phone call. Tate in Michigan. Aloha, Tate. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I was calling you back yesterday. I wanted to get talking about the Karen Hoodis thing, and you mentioned something that had to do with gold, but it doesn't have anything to do with gold. That here's a woman that she was an attorney for the World Bank for 21 years. Mm-hmm. She's a whistleblower. She addressed Congress in 2007, actually the Treasury, about the fraud and corruption. Mm-hmm. She was warning that if we don't change our ways, we're going to lose our gentleman's agreement to appoint the managing director of the IMF and the World Bank, and that did happen in 2010. In '99, she ran the whole corruption investigation in the Philippines with Joseph Estrada and the looting.
Yeah, I'm familiar with her background. Can we sort of get to the point here?
Yeah, the point is that she has proven through fact that the manipulation goes way beyond J.P. Morgan and Chase and Bank of America. It goes to the highest levels of the military-controlled World Bank, and they're completely destroying the Western financial system with this, and this is what's going to really force the BRICS nations to fully leave the Western financial system.
Well, they're already doing that, and Karen is hardly the only person to have come to that same conclusion.
But she actually has found a remedy to it that we can still salvage this without going to war, without doing that, and it could be literally paying off the Federal Reserve with one simple little coin and being done with them, ending the whole Federal Reserve system.
Now you're talking about the $1 trillion coin, right?
It's almost a hype. It doesn't even matter because it's pointless money. It's all fiat, is what she's saying.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The $1 trillion coin was just another way to increase government debt without making it look like it's debt. But again, there certainly isn't $1 trillion worth of platinum in the proposed coin.
Exactly. It's merely fiat. But the point is that she's meeting with the governors. Mm-hmm. She's meeting with county executives. She actually has a case in court that this could bring things down and shed a lot of light, but nobody's really covering it. And as much as you get into the banking, this is all you. If you do a little research on her, I think you're really going to be impressed.
Okay, well, again, I've read a lot of what she's put out there, and I agree with a lot of it, but obviously I don't agree with all of it. And apparently she's being credited with this statement that there's a vast hoard of gold bullion here in the state of Hawaii, and the amount of gold that she names in that claim is, according to some estimates, that's virtually the entire world's gold supply. And right now, when you've got the New York Federal Reserve and the Bank of France and various other recognized gold bullion centers having leased out their gold and unable to get it back, it would stand to reason that had there been any significant amounts of gold bullion here in Hawaii, it too was probably leased out and they can't get it back. It doesn't really fit with the rest of the model of gold manipulation for there to be a significant, huge stash of gold here in Hawaii. Now, there is gold here in Hawaii. There's no question about it. We have gold just like everybody else, gold jewelry, and there is certain amounts of gold coin and gold bar in trade here in Hawaii. But this huge, vast sum that is being proposed, that doesn't pass the smell test.
Well, the only misquote that I've heard her actually say was they were talking about the 300 tons of gold that Germany wanted back that we reneged on, and she even calls it an act of war. She missaid and said 300,000 tons. But other than that, I have not heard that she's quoted as saying there's these vast amounts in Hawaii.
Okay, well, we had a caller who was saying that yesterday, and again, I haven't gone back to actually confirm whether or not she herself said that. But again, as we get into this period of history where Americans are very skeptical about what the government is doing and saying, the government responds by trying to put out a lot of nonsense to keep the issue muddied, to make it difficult for people to find their way through to what is really going on, whether that is vast reported amounts of gold hiding over here, Nisara, no plane at the Pentagon, we got that one the other day. It's just part of that whole attempting to keep the people muddled and confused so the government can continue to operate with impunity, and it doesn't work anymore. It's an obsolete tactic.
I'm quite confident that she would come on your show.
Well, I will look into some more of her writings and see about maybe getting her on the show. But again, I need to go back and fact-check this issue about the gold that's supposed to be here in Hawaii, because that absolutely does not make any sense at all, given the extreme shortage of bullion among those money center banks and gold brokerages. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the program, over at investmentwatchblog.com, they have an article where the member states of the European Union have failed to reach an agreement on their supplementary budget, and they're looking at a $2.7 billion shortfall going into next month. And they're scrambling to basically find some way to paper over that problem. And again, the problem with the European Union is that they, like the United States of America, are enslaved to a privately owned central bank that issues all currency as a loan at interest, a system which by design always produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt. And that's why every single nation on earth throughout history with the same banking system winds up drowning in debt and the bankers owning everything. The United States fought a revolution to break free of this kind of banking system, only to have a corrupt Congress and a corrupt president sell us back into the same form of slavery 100 years ago. Now, the reason this is a concern for us all is that Wall Street has sold an estimated $90 trillion worth of credit default swaps against Europe's debt. When Europe defaults, the people holding those credit default swaps are going to be pounding on Wall Street's doors demanding payment. Wall Street does not have the cash reserves to make those payments. I'm going to wager a plugged Turkish piastre right now that somewhere between now and the middle of next month, the Federal Reserve will very generously create U.S. dollar equivalent of 2.7 billion euros and send it over to Europe to prop up their banking system, keep that bottom of the ledger in the black in order to prevent the triggering of those credit default swaps. But this is not a solution. They're just gaming the system. And every time that Federal Reserve puts out a new round of freshly created dollars, either ink and paper or in the computer, it steals real value from the money you've already worked for, earned, saved, put in your pocket, buried in the mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. It's like Lord Voldemort is over at the Federal Reserve waving his magic wand, and the money, the value of the money vanishes from your pocket by magic and appears in the pockets of the bankers. It's the way the system is set up. Back when the United States had money that was based on units of value, silver, gold, copper, nickel, once that money was in your pocket, there was nothing the government or the bankers could do to change the value of that money. Now, with all of this paper and ink and computer instant creation, no matter how hard you work, no matter what you put in your pocket, at any moment, the bank and the government can say, it's only worth half as much as it was yesterday. And they've done it before, too, back in the mid-90s. They did a sudden devaluation of the dollar versus the Japanese currency, which triggered that Japanese real estate buying boom. And all of a sudden, overnight, Japanese imported products that Americans wanted to buy doubled in price. Because Americans lost control over the value of their own money. And that is one of the first effects that you have when the public currency ceases to be a public utility and becomes a privatized for-profit opportunity for the banks. Apparently, Alan Greenspan is out there making the interview rounds. He's got a new book out to basically try and put out his version of the history of the Federal Reserve and what a swell bunch of Joes there are out there. And he has acknowledged there are some problems. If you'll remember that wonderful videotaped segment from the celebration they had down at Jekyll Island celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve. And he was actually up there on camera saying, there's fraud, there's wrongdoing, bad things are being done, and it's creating a problem because people can't trust their counterparties, which was about as honest as anybody inside the banking system ever gets about the flaws of the banking system. So Greenspan's over on Bloomberg TV, and he's out there saying, so I was wrong about the forecast. I'm not Superman. It's not my fault. You know, you expect too much of me to keep this economy running for the benefit of the people, which is absolutely true, because they don't run the Federal Reserve for the benefit of the American people or the American nation. The Federal Reserve System operates for the benefit of the Federal Reserve. Over at Ex Republic TV, they've got a little clip where Alan Greenspan admits that all of the Wall Street insiders knew there was a bubble in 2008. With the mortgage-backed security fraud, they bubbled it up, and everybody rode the bubble up. The insiders got out early, and they dumped the losses on everybody who came in late. And his explanation for that is, I don't apologize. I was doing the best I can. And the inevitable question is, who were you doing your best for, the American people or the bankers? It's an adversarial relationship. Because banks, private banks, do not serve the community. They serve only themselves. Now, getting over to the NSA, and they seem to be just on a roll at annoying and angering the rest of the world here. James Clapper has now come out absolutely saying that reports that the U.S. was tapping French phones are completely false. It's nonsense. We wouldn't do anything like that. And, of course, we already have him lying about how the NSA spying thwarted some 57 potential terror attacks. And they've got zero proof for it. They won't even talk about it, saying, oh, it's national security. Just take our word for it. We thwarted all these bad things that would have happened if we're not allowed to listen in on our ex-girlfriends. Apparently, NSA tapped 1.8 million Dutch phone calls in 1 month. So it's just all over there. Apparently, over in Italy, millions of private communications intercepted. And apparently the Italian government knew, and at least initially was going along with it, saying, oh, yes, we have to snoop on our people. We have to spy on our people. They may be thinking bad thoughts about the direction our country is going in. Well, again, yeah, when you have a government that is in service to financial interests against the interests of the people are probably not going to be happy about that. You don't need a vast intelligence network to understand that's probably going on. But the biggest scandal going on right now is that apparently they have determined that the NSA spied on German Chancellor Angela Merkel's cell phone. And that is a hideous diplomatic faux pas. And Merkel has apparently called Obama to complain about it. And I presume that Obama came out and said, we wouldn't do anything like that. Really? It's just silly to think that we would actually be spying on foreign leaders. The European Union Parliament is now going to scrap their previous data agreement with the U.S. The European Union and the United States were gathering all this data, and they had an agreement to swap data with each other, supposedly for terrorism-related investigations, and we know that's completely nonsense. We know the NSA is not able to find real terrorists, certainly weren't able to do anything about Boston. We know the NSA cannot find real criminals. We demonstrated with our 3 NSA challenges that anybody with a little awareness of programming can come up with encryption schemes the NSA cannot break. And again, talking about this new malware that's going around the world, CryptoLocker. If the NSA can't hunt that guy down, or gal down, and throw them in the hoosegow, it's a reminder that this NSA's massive spying system is all about looking at you. Now, as one of our callers mentioned earlier in the show, all of this misbehavior by the U.S. government, both NSA spying and economic, is fueling the growth of the BRICS nations. And along with developing their own trade and reserve currency to avoid having to deal with the dollar, they are now investing money in setting up their own internet backbone that will not go through the United States, will not be U.S.-centric is the word they're using. So now computer users have a choice. We can choose to use an internet riddled with NSA backdoors that's spying on us and leaves us wide open to hackers, or we can use an internet with a lot more privacy and security. So let me think about that one for a while, which one I want to use. And again, we know demonstrably this government is absolutely unconcerned with your privacy. They view you as property, as livestock, that it is their job to watch every single thing that you do to make sure you're not thinking those bad thoughts. And ultimately, responsibility for keeping your data private, whether it's your business secrets, your erotic photos of your significant other, your Aunt Mary's top secret chocolate chip cookie recipe, responsibility for keeping that private rests with you. You must take active steps to keep your information out of the hands of a government which provably cannot be trusted with your personal information. And again, go back to the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference in Seattle, huge scandal, U.S. intelligence agencies funded by tax dollars were stealing business secrets from conference attendees to give to political cronies. It's got nothing to do with crime prevention, has nothing to do with terrorism. It's just outright corporate spying. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as we head up to the top of the hour in our interview with Keith Johnson from Activist Post, I want to talk about the story we've seen over the last couple of days where Saudi Arabia is very unhappy with the United States government over the United States' failure to invade Syria and to deal decisively with Iran. Harumph, 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 harumph. Well, I'm having a problem with this story. I think the issue of Syria and Iran is just a cover. Now, yes, Saudi Arabia wants regional threats to their power reduced, but not to the same extent that Israel does. Certainly not enough to risk alienating the United States of America, and for a very simple reason. As part of the petrodollar deal, Saudi Arabia invests much of the U.S. dollars they accept for their oil in the U.S. economy. Estimates of how much they've bought into the U.S. economy range between $400 billion and $800 billion. And some of that are in treasury bonds. Now, if Saudi Arabia breaks off diplomatic ties and becomes an opponent of the United States of America, it opens the door for the United States government to freeze and seize those assets inside the United States. And I don't think Saudi Arabia's concerns about Syria and Iran are worth risking that volume of cash. Because that volume of cash buys a lot of influence with the U.S. government, which of course annoys the heck out of Israel. And I think what's really going on is that Saudi Arabia, because of that between $400 and $800 billion investment in the United States, is very concerned with the fact that the U.S. government cannot get its financial house in order. Saudi Arabia knows that when the U.S. economy collapses, that $400, $800 billion they've invested in this country is going to simply vanish. And what may be going on is they are sending a warning to the United States that they will start to dump those investments, including the T-bills, and move their money elsewhere unless the U.S. government gets its financial house in order, which means taking more away from you to balance the books for a government that is absolutely reckless with their spending on wars and all the rest of that. Now, that could backfire because, again, if the U.S. and Saudi Arabia get into an adversarial relationship, it would be trivial for the United States to say, oh, Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11, because they've already said that. Right after 9/11, oh, it's the Saudis, it's the Saudis. And say, we are designating Saudi Arabia a state sponsor of terrorism, and we are freezing their assets inside the United States of America. So something very ugly is getting ready to happen between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and I don't think it really has all that much to do with Syria and Iran. And we need to keep an eye on that situation. Georgia will now join NATO's Rapid Reaction Force. Georgia is back in the news here again. And remember, if you look at a map of that part of the world, for Russia to militarily support Iran, which they've already vowed they will do. When the U.S. invades Iran, Russia has already stated quite clearly they will supply Iran with weapons and material from the other side, turn it into a new Vietnam, and grind the United States down in a war of attrition, which Russia has the economy to do and the U.S. does not. So now Georgia is being brought into NATO because there are really only two land routes for convoys to go from Russia into Iran. One is through Afghanistan, and here we have the U.S. staying in Afghanistan after next year, despite all the assurances to you, the American people. And the other land route, of course, is that land bridge between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and principally those tunnels coming through the Caucasus Mountains. And so now if they can basically get Georgia into the NATO alliance, then they have a blockade on that land route. And I think that's the reason why they're once again getting Georgia militarized, getting them part of NATO. All righty, let's see. Israel is reaffirming their position regarding Syria, which is a very polite way of saying that they're conducting airstrikes on the border between Lebanon and Syria, ostensibly to keep weapons from reaching militants. So Israel's out there bombing again. We know that yesterday it was reported there was an incursion by armed Israeli troops into Lebanon. They walked across the border into a village. It's a clear provocation. They're daring Lebanon or Hezbollah to strike back, at which point they'll say, Lebanon's attacking, Hezbollah's attacking. We didn't do anything wrong. And the war will be off and running. They couldn't get war with Syria with that lie about Assad gassing his own Alawite supporters. So they're going to provoke other ways. The war agenda is still on there. They're not giving up. If at first you don't succeed, lie again. Meanwhile, Israel's Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon is again saying that Israel's position in the P5+1 talks, which they are not actually a party of, I might add, is that Iran must give up all uranium enrichment. Now, ostensibly, this is all about Iran's nuclear weapons, which they don't have any more than Saddam Hussein had. But Iran is allowed, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, to have nuclear power generation, medical isotopes, other benign, peaceful industrial applications of nuclear technology, which form part of Iran's exports, which are directly competing with Israel's nuclear exports, not including the clandestine nuclear weapons that Israel has been caught trying to sell to other countries. And so this is all about dollar signs. It's about maintaining market monopoly for Israel's nuclear industry. And it is a non-starter for Iran. They've invested a huge amount of money developing a nuclear power infrastructure. And all these other facilities, they are fully in compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And they have a history of non-belligerence. They haven't launched a war of aggression against other countries in over 200 years. Now, developments in Damascus. Apparently we're hearing that there's been a major explosion at the airport near Damascus, and it may have something to do with this report that we were seeing out of wakeupfromyourslumber.com, that the Syrian army has surrounded a stronghold of these foreign-backed militants in the Damascus countryside. So it appears there's a pitched battle going on there as well. Over at Investment Watch blog, they've got another little interesting story here where the Senate Intelligence Committee and head CIA lawyer are now admitting that torture was completely unnecessary, that it really did not have to be done, that 24 scenario of, oh, this guy we've got knows where the nuclear bomb is buried and it's going to go off in 24 hours, so we have to torture him to tell us where it is. That scenario never happens in real life. It never has happened. All torture does is get you a politically expedient confession. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, good idea. 137 waterboardings. They tortured his children and made him watch, and only then did he say, yes, I'm the mastermind of 9/11. I shot Abraham Lincoln. I personally nailed Jesus to the cross. Now, here's an interesting little story, and we know this has been going on, but it's nice to finally see a little bit of confirmation. And again, this is from Investment Watch blog. There's a new book out called Murdoch's World, and it basically relates the story of how Fox News had their public relations people writing comments on the Internet to defend the news channel against negative commentary about the network. And they didn't go out and say, I work for Fox News or I work for Fox News Public Relations Department. They basically went out there pretending to be just plain folks saying, oh, I love this commentator, I love that commentator. And we know this goes on all the time. But we're getting this confirmation here from this new book coming out that Fox News does have their people out here in the independent media calling into talk shows, posting on blogs saying, Fox News is great, Fox News is wonderful, you should be watching them. Don't pay no attention to Republic Broadcasting Network. You want to get your news from the Fox Network. And yet, of course, we know Fox Network was hand in glove with the U.S. government when they were out there saying, Saddam has nuclear bombs, we must invade and attack. Now, a couple of stories regarding guns and gun rights, because we're coming up on the top of the hour with Keith Johnson here. Headline news all over. Massachusetts school shut down after teacher was allegedly murdered by a 14-year-old. Math teacher was found dead outside the Danvers High School. They've got a suspect. What are they not telling us? Was this kid on medication for ADHD? They'll never relieve that. Meanwhile, out in California, sheriff's deputies shot a 13-year-old for holding a toy gun. That's not getting the same media coverage, is it? We'll be right back after Phyllis Shapley and these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. And joining us for our third hour is Keith Johnson from over at Activist Post. Keith, thank you for spending time with us today.
Oh, real good. Thank you, Mike. And it's American Free Press.
I'm sorry, I mistook. I must have mistyped here.
No, but I would be honored to be considered part of Activist Post. They're real good folks over there. But yeah, I'm currently writing for American Free Press.
Okay, well, it doesn't really matter. I'm glad you're here on the show here. And the topic under discussion for this third hour is it appears we're heading into another phase of an attempt to demonize law-abiding gun owners and guns. We know this government is trying to find some way they can convince Americans to surrender their guns. We're seeing all of these attempts to rewrite the Second Amendment, even though the United States Supreme Court already ruled in the Heller decision that the Second Amendment confers an individual right for the American people to keep and bear arms. And we're seeing textbooks in the schools are literally rephrasing the Second Amendment to make it sound like only government-organized troops are allowed to have guns. It really is an onslaught on this most basic freedom and right of the American people.
Yes, you're right, Mike. As a matter of fact, I've been writing extensively on a lot of the gun control measures that have been pushed here in the last few months, and also about many of the people who have been successful in repealing some of these laws, or in the process of getting these laws repealed, most particularly in Colorado. There were a couple Democrats on the state Senate who were removed just recently due to the efforts of some brave Colorado citizens who said, no, we don't want this. They wanted to expand background checks, magazine capacity, things of that nature. And they were successful. Just a grassroots effort from people who just got up and said no. And a lot of these were women. As a matter of fact, earlier this year, there was a lady who was the victim of a brutal rape by the name of Kimberly Banks, I believe her name is, or Kimberly Weeks, that's what it is. And she testified with a handful of other women to say, please don't take our Second Amendment rights away. She was instrumental in getting a lot of people to step forward and say no. And there was a group called 1 Million Mothers Against Gun Control, which was formed earlier this year, back in January, in response to a lot of the hype that came out of the Sandy Hook tragedy. They saw these women coming forward, this 1 million mothers for sensible gun laws. So this was a counter movement, and they've managed to get 25,000 members here within the last few months. But they were also instrumental in stepping out, knocking on doors, getting people to the polls, and getting these people removed. So while there's a lot of bad news out there, there is a lot of good news as well, Mike.
Well, we need to basically look at maybe in a way reframing the gun debate. because a lot of the pro-gun activists are going back to the original purpose of the Second Amendment, which was to arm the American people against abuse and tyranny by the government. And that is very threatening to those Americans who still cling desperately to the belief that government is good and should never, ever be questioned or challenged. But we know in this country that law enforcement, along with just brutalizing the American people, has dropped the ball when it comes to enforcing the laws and dealing with regular street crime. We know that crime is going through the roof, driven by the economic downturn. We know that local communities are diverting their police resources into traffic enforcement because that generates revenue. And I think common sense has to tell you that we, the people, have a right to keep and bear arms equal to, if not superior to, those in the hands of the criminals. And we know our government has been sending down to these Mexican drug cartels the very sorts of military-style weapons they're trying to take away from us. Now we're finding out these Mexican drug cartels are getting hand grenades paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. And it really is very absurd because these guns come back across the border into the U.S. culture. We know the criminals have these guns. Why are law-abiding citizens denied possession, denied the right to own exactly those same kind of weapons with which to thwart crimes in progress? Because the reality is the police are rarely there to stop a crime in progress. They'll show up after it's all over. They'll pose with the dead bodies in their nice shiny uniforms and their brass buttons for the press cameras, but they are not there in time to stop the crime from happening in the first place. But we know that something like every year 1.6 million crimes are thwarted in progress by law-abiding citizens with legally owned guns, and I went through this myself back when I was living in Southern California about 20 years ago, where I chased a burglar out of our home. And I didn't have to pull the trigger, and I was very happy about that. And I called the police to report the attempted burglary. They didn't even show up to take a report. They don't want reports about how citizens are protecting their own homes and their own wealth. It doesn't help sell the idea that we have to always pay for larger police forces with armored cars and LRADs and the rest of that. But the reality is the police don't get there in time to deal with the crime. They're always there to clean up the mess afterwards and promise justice, which means revenge and retribution. And even then, I think the current statistic is that if you are unknown to the police databases and you go down to a convenience store in some part of town where they don't know who you are and you rob that store, there is less than a 1 in 33 chance you will even be arrested regarding that. So that's how out of control crime is. So in that context of a citizenry that has a right to defend themselves from crime in an age where the police just aren't there to do it, that alone tells us we should have a right to all of the weapons that the criminals have, which is high-capacity magazines, military-style rifles. We do have a legitimate need for those in a high-crime situation.
Most definitely. And going back to what you started with, saying that the police, the law enforcement agencies, especially the local ones out there, are ready and willing to enforce a lot of these gun control laws. And I just recently spoke to a candidate for sheriff in the county of San Bernardino in California. Now, folks, San Bernardino, California, the county, is the largest geographical county in the United States. It's the second largest sheriff's department in California. I don't know where it ranks in the rest of the nation. But this gentleman I spoke to, he has 30 years of law enforcement experience. He's an oath keeper. He's a member of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. And he's running for the office of sheriff in San Bernardino County. And this really is important, folks, to understand that one of the last lines of defense against federal takeover of your local communities is your sheriff. And currently there are about 500 sheriffs who signed on to Sheriff Mack's Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. This gentleman, Paul Schrader, who I spoke to recently, this article will be coming out today, as a matter of fact, on the website. He's part of this. But you see, the sheriff is an elected official. He's accountable to the people. And these people who are constitutional, or who claim to be constitutional sheriffs, have taken an oath to the Constitution and refused to be a part of any illegal, unconstitutional gun confiscations. And you need to press these people when they come forward and say they're going to represent you, I asked them a question. I said, what do you believe the Second Amendment is? And he told me, just like you said, Mike, quote, the Second Amendment was put in place to protect you from the tyranny of the federal government. And he said, I truly believe that if they are allowed to carry a machine gun, you should be allowed to carry a bazooka. Now, that's the kind of person you want there. Now, whether or not, a lot of these people that are candidates, they say one thing, and then several years down the road, you have to find out if they actually live up to, their pledges. I think that one thing we should implement, is that we should keep these politicians accountable. And I would suggest a capital offense for those people who go back on their campaign promises. Don't promise something that you cannot follow through with.
Well, that's one of the big problems with our political system. We have to take a break for commercials, and when we come back, I'm going to follow up on that exact comment about why we have politicians who feel they can lie to us during campaign season with impunity. We'll be right back in 3 minutes. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Keith Johnson from American Free Press, and you're absolutely correct. One of the problems that we are dealing with in this country is that candidates for office will just say whatever they think the voters want to hear, and they are not at all compelled to keep those promises once they're in office. We certainly know that with Obama. He campaigned in 2008 on ending the war and bringing our people home, and you can take that to the bank. And, of course, he did exactly the opposite. And not only are politicians allowed to simply lie during the campaigns, there have actually been court rulings saying it's an exercise of their First Amendment right to freedom of speech to lie to you. And lying is big business in this country. We've had this very horrible story coming out of Fox News where they had these two reporters who were reporting on a Monsanto product that was proving to be harmful. They were ordered to lie about the Monsanto product. They refused and were fired, sued for wrongful termination, and the court said, no, there is no law that says the corporate media has to tell you the truth about anything. The owners of the corporate media can order their prostitutes to lie, and if the prostitutes and whore respondents refuse, they can be fired for cause, and that really says a lot about the state of the United States. And you're absolutely right. When we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we should definitely have a provision in there where any candidate running for office, if they don't keep their promises, if they don't do what they say they'll do and only what they say they'll do, they need to be kicked out of office. We need to have a lemon law for all politicians. You get them for 90 days. If they're not doing the job that you thought they were going to do, you get to kick them out and put somebody else in.
Yes, absolutely, most definitely. And they have always got these excuses, they'll trade the lesser of two evils in their eyes when legislation comes up, and they say, well, I made two promises, and this one's more important, so I'm going to go ahead and sacrifice, this particular gun control bill and go ahead and allow that to go through just so, it'll appease these other people that want this to go. It's just, they've always got an excuse to it, and I think it needs to come to a stop. It's ridiculous. But, Mike, there is what I see the direction in this gun control push is these laws or these pieces of legislation, these bills that are coming out that require background checks on people and prohibiting people from owning firearms that have been diagnosed as mentally ill. I mean, who is making the determination of who's mentally ill? And who is defining what mental illness is?
Well, we've been, pardon me for interrupting, but we've been talking about this issue in relation to the overprescription of psychiatric medications, which is a for-profit opportunity, where there are no scientific tests where you can be hooked up to a machine and the needle says this person is mentally ill. It's always subjective by some psychologist or psychiatrist who may have a vested interest in the pharmaceutical company that is selling the medications he's prescribing. And it's all very fuzzy, and we're having people like the guy who came up with ADHD shortly before he died. He said, we just made it up to sell pills with. And I know that some of these laws about saying your Second Amendment rights can be revoked if you're mentally ill, they make specific mention of returning veterans from the military zones who are suffering from PTSD. And I think the reason the military veterans are being targeted is they represent an already trained military force among the population that would stand in opposition to the government in the event of a major crisis. And it's all, boiling the frog slowly kind of an approach. The goal of the government is to, if not totally disarm the American people, at least to make sure that we have arms that are greatly inferior to those held by the government forces. And yet we have a Supreme Court decision, the Miller decision, which specifically says the Second Amendment reserves to the American people the exact same arms held by the military. And again, this government is desperate for more wealth confiscation. If they get the guns, they're going to come for the gold, they're going to come for the silver, and they've done it before back in 1933. So this is a government that is very much afraid of the American people right now. And it's kind of interesting when I was having a discussion about the John F. Kennedy assassination recently, and we were talking about that Mannlicher Carcano rifle that was planted on Oswald, and it was the world's worst shoulder weapon. The scope had a manufacturing defect. The reticle, the target crosshairs could not even be lined up where the bullet was going, and everybody's saying, why did they put that rifle on him? Why not a more credible assassination weapon like a Mauser? And the reason was, at that time, Fidel Castro, the evil dictator, the tyrant, we were all being told, was importing shiploads of Mannlicher Carcanos to give to the Cuban people to make sure there wasn't going to be a repeat of the Bay of Pigs. And so we had this guy that we're told is a dictator giving guns to his own people, and here in the land of the free, we're told our government's trying to take them away. Same thing with Iraq under Saddam Hussein. We were told what an evil tyrant he was. Gun laws were very loose there. You could have fully automatic weapons. And here in this country, they're trying to disarm the people. All of our leaders are riding around in these armored tanks. They're clearly very much afraid of the American people right now, and that is the real agenda, because we know every single study shows that when the law-abiding citizen are allowed to have guns, crime will go down. But this government doesn't care what's good for the people. They're only looking at what's good for themselves, and what's good for the government right now is a totally disarmed, helpless, and dependent population.
Yeah, most definitely. If you look at pictures and videos of Saddam Hussein walking through Baghdad or standing on a balcony, you see people who are armed. They have automatic weapons in their hands.
I remember those videos.
And yet we have our politicians who are, they're behind bulletproof glass. They'll cordon off complete blocks, and they'll search people coming in. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And they are completely 100% afraid of the American people. And I think that most of your listening audience would agree that the federal government is by far the greatest threat to our safety and our security. So why would you provide the enemy with vital intelligence? And that's really what gun registration is. They're collecting intelligence on whom they perceive as their enemy. So why would you voluntarily give them, why would you reveal your position? How many soldiers you have stationed there and the types of weapons that they have, okay? I don't think the U.S. military would think that that's a good idea to provide the perceived enemies with this kind of intelligence. So why would we do this?
I'm sure that's a big part of the NSA spying on all of our Facebook posts and everything, is they're looking for information on people saying, I went target shooting this last week, and they're building those databases as well. Just like they're trying to, now they've started registering gold purchases by the American citizens, so they know where to go to get the gold to prop up the banks.
Mm-hmm. And, the California has a system. It's called the Armed Prohibited Persons System, which is a database of registered gun owners, and it's cross-referenced with those who've been diagnosed with mental illness. And like we say, it's very easy to get on this list. You could go talk to a psychiatrist and say that you're, perhaps a family member just died, or you're dealing with emotional struggles that are just associated with everyday life. And there is legislation out there that is forcing medical professionals to provide the government with information of people who have had serious, or have had episodes, and then you get on this list. You're cross-referenced. The California Department of Justice is going out with agents. They just funded $24 million to expedite this APPS system, this Armed Prohibited Persons system, to go out and knock on doors to collect legally purchased firearms from people who have been diagnosed with some sort of mental illness, or they're taking prescription drugs, whether it be these serotonin uptake inhibitors and whatnot. And it's happening all over California now.
And it's happening in New York. It's happening in New York as well.
Right, and there's legislation that is, I mean, this is a model program in California and in New York, and they're trying to get this nationwide. But those who live in California, if you
we got to take a break. I'm sorry to cut you off. We got to take a break. 4-minute break. We'll be right back with Keith Johnson from American Free Press and Gun Rights. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Keith Johnson from American Free Press. And talking about this idea that they're starting to pass laws where the government can go out and knock on the door of law-abiding citizens with legally owned firearms and confiscate those firearms on the grounds that the person is potentially mentally ill is a very slippery slope, because in recent months we have seen the government trying to sell the idea that people who doubt the official government story on anything are by definition mentally ill, which is an old tactic from the Soviet Union. So if you don't believe the official story of 9/11, you must be suffering a mental illness. If you think the Federal Reserve is somehow very damaging to our economy, you've got to be mentally ill. And basically this is a mechanism by which those people likely to take a stand against government encroachment are going to be selectively disarmed.
Yes, most definitely. There was a gentleman here in the state of Tennessee where I currently live. I'm originally from California, but he was on this show called Doomsday Preppers, and he has a radio show or a YouTube channel, something like that. But anyway, he went in. He had chest pains, and the doctor told him that he needed to have certain things done, and he said, "No, thank you." So he left, and this doctor came up with the diagnosis that he was suicidal. Because obviously, if you don't follow the instructions of your doctor, you must want to die. So how ridiculous is this going to be? I mean, if you refuse chemotherapy, are you going to be deemed as a suicidal person? I mean, this is not too far-fetched, because this gentleman, when he went home, he was forced, the police came, they forced him into an ambulance, and they confiscated his firearms. And as far as I know, he has not received those firearms back. So like you say, it is a very slippery slope. And I was going to say that I'm glad you did touch on that there is efforts being made out there to classify those who are considered conspiracy theorists or, as a mental illness. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, you go in there and you simply say, listen, I believe that there is a conspiracy by this government to take our guns. That could potentially result in a diagnosis of mental illness, and your gun rights could be taken away. So this is something that people really need to follow. And as far as the California and New York laws where these agents are going out knocking on your door, you have to understand that they do not have the probable cause for a search warrant. So they will use the art of persuasion to try to get into your door. Mm-hmm. They can't confiscate your firearms simply because you're on a database. So all you have to do is tell them, please go away, close your door, and they can't do anything.
Well, these are very, very dark times. And again, in a nation where crime is going through the roof for economic reasons and because the police are just not going to be there to deal with the crime, it is just only common sense that law-abiding American citizens have a right to keep and bear arms equal to those in the hands of the criminals. Very clearly, the government is not concerned with your welfare and your health and your safety. They're just concerned with managing you like a herd of property, and that includes disarmament, total surveillance. They'll tell you what to eat, what not to eat, what medications you must take, what medications you're not allowed to take. And it really does betray this idea that the government seems to have, that you are their property and you're the property of the banks and the bankers, and that they have this right because they own you to basically control every aspect of your life. We're going to grab a phone call here real quick. Otto in Montana. Aloha, Otto. Welcome to the show. Do you have a question for Keith?
Aloha, Michael. I'm a listener, a short-time listener. I've been listening 3-4 months. Listen, I have some information for you and your listeners. And the key word here is jurisdiction, okay? Mm-hmm. I have to explain, I'm foreign-born, okay? I grew up in Czechoslovakia. In 1968, I was throwing rocks at the Russian tanks that came rumbling through my town. And I lived under communism, although I was young, I remember, okay?
And what we have going on here in America today is very, very scary. Okay?
Yes.
We're on the verge of collapse, like you say all the time, very, very dark times. And if a policeman in Czechoslovakia shot a person, all hell would break loose, and that person would probably go to jail or be executed.
You mean the officer?
They do it here with wanton. And anyway, back to jurisdiction. I have discovered recently, if you have been interested in law, okay, linguistics. I didn't speak a word of English when I came here at the age of 16. I graduated from high school with a 3.6 grade point average. Went to some college, but I didn't do well in there because I lost control over myself, you know.
I understand how that goes. Anyway, if we could get to the jurisdictional point because we're coming up on a commercial break.
Sorry, I have discovered recently in studying law that the definitions for the United States, there are three definitions. You know, the land mass that it occupies, it's the nation among nations, and it's the federal government. And the federal government has no business in the state. Okay, we are not a nation. We are a confederacy of 50 separate, independent, sovereign states. I'm a Montanan because I chose to live in Montana. Now, in the United States codes, which are 51 codes, okay, 50 or 51. In there, they publish the original organic laws of this nation, of this confederacy, which is the Declaration of Independence, which I deem to be the greatest document ever written by human beings. The second one is the Articles of Confederacy. Those laws are on the books. They have never been rescinded, revoked, or somehow done away with. And they mention the word free inhabitant in the Articles of Confederation. Okay? And starting with George Washington, that hoodlum, who never signed the Constitution. He took an oath, an oral oath. Okay? They had a secret congressional convention, okay? And what they did is they created the United States Constitution, okay, which is not the one that we think it is. It was to administer the territories and possessions of the United States.
Okay, well, we're running out of time. I'm going to cut you off here, and I certainly understand, and all of our listeners understand, that the way the United States was first created, the power and authority and control rested in the states, and the federal government was limited to simply arbitrating among the states. But beginning at the end of the Civil War, the federal government launched on a program of basically creating a new American empire. We know they have overstepped their legal authority. We know they have overstepped the limits of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. The question is what to do about it. I oppose the idea of a violent revolution in this country because this federal government is already prepared to fight and win that war. What this government cannot deal with, what they cannot handle, is 300 million Americans standing up peacefully and shouting to the rest of the world, we will not be the wallets of last resort for Wall Street's crimes and Washington, D.C.'s fiscal failings, and the message is getting out. So I know we can argue about the letter of the law, but it's rather a futile exercise when we have a federal government that isn't following its own laws. They didn't even follow their own law with Obamacare, which is why we now have this lawsuit making its way through the federal court. So, Otto, we're going to let you go here. And, Keith, before we get to the commercial break, what is a website you would like our listeners to read more of your writings at?
Oh, yes, please visit the website of American Free Press. That's AmericanFreePress.net. And you can also call our toll-free number, 888-699-NEWS. That's 888-699-NEWS. We are a newspaper. We also, we have a website where we post some of our stories, but if you want to get the whole scoop, you would want to subscribe to our newspaper, and I encourage you to do that. You can get an online subscription for more than less the cost of a carton of cigarettes or a case of beer. And this is something you can carry around with you. You can share it with your friends, a newspaper, if you're out there and you write down a website on a piece of paper, it's going to get lost. It's going to get lost in the wash. Someone's going to throw it away. But if you give them a newspaper, something they carry around with them and share it with others, I still believe in the power of the press.
And the NSA isn't looking over your shoulder when you're reading something that's on wood, pulp, and ink.
Exactly, most definitely. And you can get a subscription, for a nominal fee. For a whole year, I think it's like $50, something like that. But yeah, visit the website of American Free Press, and if you're so inclined, that toll-free number, give them a call and it's a chronological sequence. You can file it away, and every single week you can see what those top stories are. In the event something happens to the Internet, I don't believe that something is going to happen to the Internet, but at least you have a hard copy, something, you can take into your favorite reading room.
Keith, we have to let you go now. We've got a commercial break here. We're coming up on the last segment of the show. I got a couple of hot headlines I got to get to, and Keith, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We will be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We got a couple of stories that have been emerging during the last hour. The new spin coming out of the White House is that President Obama was never told that there were problems with the software system, with the sign-up system. How could he have possibly known? That's his latest excuse. Well, Mr. Obama, it's your job to know these things. And I think what they're getting ready to do is Obama is going to dump the software nightmare onto Kathleen Sebelius. She's going to fall on her sword to save His Imperial Majesty. And she's already out there basically destroying herself in the eyes of the public. She's not signing up for Obamacare. She's already got compliant health care coverage. She's not having to use the system. She's not going to have to go through all of that stuff. It's just for you, the plebes, the serfs, to have to go through here. We saw this from Obama before when the IRS scandal broke. He said, I had no idea. And yet we know the IRS official who was very much involved with that targeting of political dissidents and Tea Party groups and so forth was up at the White House on a pretty much constant basis. That's Obama's new excuse. I had nobody told me. It's your job to find out. That is what management is supposed to be. You don't just sit there and wait for your underlings to tell you the bad news, because they're naturally inclined not to. So either Obama is flat out lying, or he's basically proclaiming to the world that he is incompetent to have that job. And in either case, he's not fit to be in that Oval Office. Now then, there's another story coming out. Apparently, you probably noticed that the Baltimore Ravens were very much out there popularizing Obamacare. And they were boosting it on TV, radio. The official Ravens website was saying Obamacare. And it turns out they were paid $130,000. They are not supporting Obamacare because of a conviction that it's a good thing and it's the right thing to do. They were simply bought and paid for. Same thing with all these celebrity endorsements. They were trying to get, oh, yes, you should do Obamacare because this movie star says it's a really great idea. Now, new development over on the NSA spying scandal, and apparently this is turning into a major diplomatic whoopsie regarding Germany, the fact that they were tapping into Angela Merkel's cell phone. I don't think she's a criminal, any more so than any other world leader. I don't think she's a terror suspect, any more or less than any other world leader. Now, Senator Dianne Feinstein, who's always out there in her little short skirt and her pom-poms cheering on for the NSA, go NSA, is out there proposing a new bill that would make it a criminal offense for anybody to speak out against the NSA spy operation or the FISA courts. Just automatically, if you say, oh, I don't think the NSA spying on us is in compliance with the Fourth Amendment, oh, you're arrested, they'll take you away and waterboard you. Talk about a sign of dictatorship right there. It's a criminal offense to criticize the government. No, it isn't. It's why we've got the First Amendment. It is the right of the people to stand up to the government and say, we think you are wrong. We think you are breaking the law. We think you are violating the Constitution. And we don't agree with what you're doing. And Dianne Feinstein wants to turn that into a crime, punishable by law. It's like the days of the Sedition Act. Most people don't even know what that means. Sedition means when you say something the government doesn't like, but it happens to be the truth and they can't refute it, but they're going to prosecute you anyway. That's what sedition is. Now, starting a few weeks back and following the allegations that a U.S. nuclear weapon had been transferred to the East Coast without the appropriate paper trail, we started seeing high-level military officers start to get dismissed from their commands for what appeared to be very trivial, benign reasons. Gambling issue this, inappropriate behavior that. The sort of things where if they were really enforcing that across the board, half the U.S. military structure would be on the unemployment line by now. But we've reached a point here, and this is a story that was coming out of Ben Swan. 9 commanding generals have now been fired and 2 other leaders on suspension. And they're calling it an historic military shakeup. And it looks like we're seeing the beginnings of some kind of a purge of the military high command, most likely being ordered and orchestrated from the White House. Now, are they getting rid of potential coup plotters, or are they getting rid of those military leaders who would refuse an order to confiscate guns from the American people? This could mean one of many things. Meanwhile, over in Nevada, remember Sheldon Adelson? He was out there pouring this huge fortune he's made from his gambling casinos into some of the most rabidly pro-Israel candidates during last year's election. And he's still in legal trouble over in China for bribing government officials over there. But apparently Sheldon Adelson has gone public saying and proposing, suggesting seriously that the United States ought to just go ahead and drop a nuclear bomb on Iran. Just to teach them that they should do what the United States says to do, regardless of that little non-proliferation treaty, and we don't care that you have a right to nuclear power under international law. When the United States says, do, you do, or you will be nuked. And he's out there pushing this whole idea that we're going to nuke Iran to prove that you should not use nuclear weapons. And that makes a huge amount of sense. And I'm sure to Sheldon Adelson, who's 80 and probably does not have all of his mental capabilities still left to him, that sounds like a good idea to do. Yeah, go and nuke the Iranians. That'll teach them. Do what we tell them to do. Now, the rest of the world already recognizes the United States as the rogue nuclear nation, because for all the talk about Saddam's non-existent nuclear weapons and all the talk about Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons, in all of human history, one and only one nation has actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country, and that, of course, is the United States, when they nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Despite the fact Japan was already trying to surrender, but the U.S. wanted to prove to the world that we have these monstrous weapons and the political will to use them. That second bomb especially, Nagasaki, was out there to say, see, we're psychotic enough to actually use these things. You'd better do what we tell you. You'd better show up at Bretton Woods and sign on to that agreement. Interesting little story coming out of Los Angeles. Apparently the city of Los Angeles is considering a ban on GMOs. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Every place in this country where they talk about labeling or banning GMOs, you have this immense financial and political machine from Monsanto coming on in. But at least they're standing up and talking about it. And the more people talk about it, and the more the public becomes aware, there are problems with these products. And they don't even know how bad or how deep the products go, because the testing is always cut off really soon. Oh, if it didn't kill them in 30 days or 90 days, it's safe for use. And we're finding out that, of course, is completely wrong. We were talking earlier in the show about military waste and the huge spending the U.S. does on these projects. Apparently, the U.S. Department of Defense has canceled this $297 million spy ship project. It's a 7-story tall spy ship. And after spending $300 million, close to $300 million to develop it, they're basically selling it back to the British company that got the contract. And it's called the Army's Long Endurance Multi-Intelligence Vehicle. Oh, it's an aircraft, not an ocean ship. But apparently it's a hovering spy ship. They've spent $300 million developing it. They sent that money to other countries. They didn't even spend that money here in the U.S. Now they've just canceled the whole thing, and they're going to sell what's left of the project back to the British maker, who will turn around, having all the R&D paid for, and probably turn it into a commercial product. They really do not think these things through at all. Interestingly enough, over on eBay, there is an original letter written by Albert Einstein in which he says Jewish terrorists are risking catastrophe in Palestine. So even Albert Einstein did not agree with what was going on over there. There's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please visit republicbroadcasting.org. Hit that donate button. If you're going to buy physical silver and gold, and you ought to be, Republic Trading Group. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.